Hi viewers, in this video we will dive into the movie The Hobbit Part 3 The Battle of Five Armies. We will discuss the movie story, summarize the plot, and explore the cast and characters. Additionally, we will cover the movie production details and box office performance. Finally, we will provide the reviews and personal reactions. Let's begin with the movie story. The people of Lake Town are in a panicked frenzy as the dragon Smaug flies down to exact his revenge. The master of Lake Town and his deputy Alfred try to evacuate with their tire while the rest of the townfolk also try to escape. Smaug descends and breathes fire all over the town, destroying a whole row of homes and killing many people. Bard the bowman, played by Luke Evans, tries to break free from his cell while his children are living with Toriel, played by Evangeline Lilly, Killy, Philly, Buffon, and Owen. On the boat, Bard's son, Bane, sees his father as he climbs the bell tower to get high enough to shoot at Smaug. Bane grabs a hook and swims over to join his father. From atop the lonely mountain, Bilbo Baggins, along with the other dwarves, Dolin, Balin, Dori, Nuri, Ori, Buffer, Gulain, and Bomber watch as the dragon continues his reign of terror while their leader Thorin Oakenshield is unable to watch with them. Bard shoots his arrows at Smaug as he continues to fly by him, but they are unable to penetrate his flesh. Bane arrives with a black arrow big enough to do the job. Smaug taunts Bard and his son as Bard aims the black arrow while balancing it on Bane's shoulder. Smaug flies toward them when Bard shoots the arrow. It strikes the dragon, causing him to scream in pain as the light leaves his body. Smaug plummets to the ground, where his body crashes the master and the gold supply. The dwarfs see that Smaug is dead and they rejoice. The surviving people of Lake Town gather the supplies they have left. Alfred tries to swipe some of a lady, but Bard stops him. The people recognize Bard as their savior for killing Smaug. They then grab Alfred and try to punish him, but Bard stops them. As their new leader, he decided they will take refuge in the town of Dale. Killy and the other dwarves are heading back to rejoin the rest of the company. Killy asks Toriel to join him. Legolas cuts in and tells Toriel to leave Killy. He then hands her the medallion that he showed her when they first met. In the mountain, the dwarfs return to Bilbo, who tells them that Thorin has started to lose his mind after being corrupted by the gold. He is going mad in his search for the Arkenstone. It turns out that Bilbo had it all along, but he did Smaug's words over Thorin going mad with the stone. Bilbo goes to Balin, who says it's best to keep the stone from Thorin. The orc and their leader Azog are marching towards Erebor when Bolg arrives to inform Azog that the elf army is approaching closely. Azog orders Bolg to go to Gunabath, an orc stronghold, to rally a greater army of orcs to join them. In Tall Gardar, Gandalf is still caked after learning that the necromancer was Sauron. A giant orc comes towards him until Galadriel arrives and vanquishes it. Then the Nazgul, nine ghost-like men who fell victim to Sauron, shows up to attack. When Elrond and Saruman come in to fight them. The two of them defeat the Nazgul as Galadriel tends to Gandalf. Radagast comes back in his sleigh to take Gandalf away. The image of Sauron appears and tries to tempt Galadriel, but she overpowers him by casting him out. She falls in a weakened state. Elrond suggests they warn everyone of Sauron, while Saruman says he will deal with the villain. Legolas and Tauriel learn that Bolg is going to Gunabad. They decided to warn them after Tauriel has been apparently banished from the kingdom by Theradol. Theradol arrives in Dale with his army close by. He speaks to Bard over farming and alliance as Theradol wants to get into the Lonely Mountain to reclaim a bunch of white gems, including a necklace made of them. Bard travels to the Lonely Mountain to speak with Thorin to try and get him to join forces with him to avoid any more bloodshed. But Thorin refuses to listen and does not want to share any part of his treasure with anyone else. Bard leaves angrily. The dwarves suited up in their armor to prepare for battle. Thorin gives Bilbo a mithril vest that is supposedly strong enough that no blade can pierce it. As the two of them speak, Thorin continues to sound more distorted and dazed as he vows not to share the treasure. Gandalf arrives in Dale and Bilbo sneaks out of the mountain at night to a tent where Gandalf, Bard, and Thranduil are talking. Bilbo gives them the Arkenstone, claiming it was his share of Thorin's treasure within the mountain. Thranduil tells Gandalf that he will finish the fight to protect his people. The next day, the elf and Laketown armies stand before Erebor. Thorin and the dwarf come out. Bard takes out the Arkenstone to offer a trade for the gold. Thorin thinks it's a trick until Bilbo admits that he gave it to them. Feeling betrayed, Thorin orders the dwarf to throw Bilbo over the edge. They refuse and Thorin nearly does it himself. Gandalf arrives to stop this, allowing Bilbo to escape and join his wizard friend. Bard asks Thorin if he will have peace or war, and Thorin growls that he will have war. Then an army of dwarves, led by Thorin's cousin Dane Ironfoot, arrives to help Thorin and his company. They attempt to attack the elf army until the orc army shows up. The other three armies joins together to fight the villains, and thus the battle of the Five Armies begins. Legolas and Tauriel get to Gunabad and discover Bolg summoning the rest of the orc forces along with a horde of giant bat creatures. In the mountain, Dolling attempts to reason with Thorin, who seems more defiant and angry. Thorin threatens to kill him if he does not leave. Dolan does so. Disappointed, Thorin goes down to the Gallery of Kings and walks over the hardened gold where he had tried to trap Smaug. He hallucinates seeing the dragon swimming beneath him as well as himself sinking into the gold. Thorin snaps out of it and overcomes his madness. Together with the dwarfs, they smash through the wall of the mountain with a bell and join in the fight. Bard has the women and children get to safety while the men fight. He hands Alfred a sword, but the dirty coward is more concerned about staying hidden and getting his treasure. Meanwhile, many innocent civilians are slaughtered in the battle. Thorin resolves to kill Azog to defeat the orc. He rides up to Ravenhill with Dolin, Philly, and Gilly. Elsewhere, Legolas and Tauriel return. Thranduil finds Toriel going off to help the dwarves and warn them of Bolg's army. But Thranduil doesn't think they are worth it and believes her love for Kili is not real. Toriel holds her bow and arrow to Thranduil, but he cuts it up. Legolas stands in the way to defend her. They join forces with Bilbo, who made it through the battle with the One Ring, and go off to warn their friends. The heroes find the orc, but in the chaos, Bilbo is knocked unconscious while Philly is impaled by Azog. Enraged, Kili returns to the top, decapitating every orc in his path. He comes before Bolg as Toriel Jan in the fight. Bolg overpowers her and throws her against the wall. Kili comes to her defenses, but Bolg stabs him through the heart. Toriel watching him die. In her fury, she grabs onto Bolg and pulls him down the edge. Legolas watches and tries to shoot an arrow, but he's all out. He gets a giant arc to ram into a tower that forms a bridge and lets him run to Toriel's aid. He battles Borg on the crumbling tower. From atop on the icy falls, he sees Thorin nearly killed by an orc until he throws his sword into the orc's chest. He then takes out his knives and drives one of them into Bolg's head. The orc falls through the tower, which crumbles completely. He hits the ground and is crushed by a piece of the tower. Radagast and Bjorn swoop in on the great eagles as they take down the rest of the orc. Bjorn morphs into his bear form and runs the orcs down. Thorin battles Azog on the icy falls. Azog swings his boulder to try and slam Thorin, only to break the ice around him. Thorin grabs the boulder and throws it to Azog, causing him to sink into the water. Thorin, watching Azog float by him, seemingly dead until the orc opens his eyes, stabs Thorin in the foot and bursts through the ice. He pins Thorin down and nearly impales him until Thorin holds him back. However, realizing the orc is too strong, Thorin lets Azog impale him until he has a clear moment to impale him back. Thorin drives his sword through Azog's body into the ice as the orc finally dies. Thorin walks over to watch the rest of the battle continue. He collapses as Bilbo comes by his side. Thorin says he is sorry to Bilbo for how he acted and for what he has put him through. He acknowledges Bilbo's friendship before he dies. Bilbo weeps for his fallen friend. The surviving dwarf come and kneel before Thorin. Legolas tells Thranduil that he is leaving the kingdom. Thranduil tells his son to meet which one of the Dondain, a man who is referred to as Strider. After Legolas leaves, Thranduil finds Turiel crying over Kili's body. She rejects love and asks why it hurts so much. Thranduil responds because it was real. Turiel kisses Kili's lips and plans to properly bury him. Bilbo leaves the mountain and tells Balin to tell the dwarves goodbye. He turns around to find them standing behind him. Bilbo properly bids them farewell and invites them to come by his home should they ever find themselves traveling toward Bad End. Gandalf guides Bilbo back to the border of the Shire. He knows that Bilbo had the ring with him, but Bilbo claims he lost it. Gandalf provides him with a word of caution before they depart. When Bilbo comes back toward his home, he sees all the people in the area walking off with his belongings. Since he was presumed dead, his belongings are being auctioned off. He demands the people to put them all back while trying to find something that proves his identity. He goes inside his home and takes out the ring. We cut to the older Bilbo holding the ring in his hand. A knock is heard at the door. Bilbo says he wants no visitor until he hears Gandalf's voice. He goes to the door to greet his old friend, and the last thing we see is Thorin's map of Erebor. Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies box office commands 11.2 million at late night box office. The Hobbit: The Battle of Five Armies marched into theaters Tuesday night, picking up a formidable 11.2 million in pre-shows. The outstrips the previous film in the series, The Hobbit: The Desolation of Smaug, which made 8.8 million in pre-shows. Third falls short of the first installment, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, which dropped in 13 million. IMAX was responsible for 2.5 million for the Five Armies Tuesday night gross. Peter Jackson's Middle-earth finale is projected to pull in between 70 million and 75 million over its first 5 days in theater. Five Armies begin showing in the US at 7 p.m. Tuesday and will expand to about 3,850 locations on Wednesday. The film has already debuted in 37 foreign markets, including such movie-going hotspots as the United Kingdom, Germany, and Russia, earning a smashing 122 million last weekend. Stateside, a debut of about 70 million would put the film in the neighborhood of the previous two installments. The first film, and Unexpected Journey, kicked off to 84.6 million in 2012, and the second chapter, The Desolation of Smaug, earned 73.6 million in its initial weekend. The two pictures just made shy of 2 million at the global box office. 2 billion. Unlike the two other Hobbit films, this follow-up debut against heavy competition in the form of Annie and Night at the Museum Secret of the Tomb. Theater owner hope that the film would inject such much needed life into a movie-going scene that is crawling toward the end of the year. Ticket sales trailed 2013 by more than 5%, heading into the Christmas holiday. Review for the final have locked behind other editions. Rotten Tomatoes currently has the picture at 60% fresh compared with 64% for an Unexpected Journey and 74% for Smaug. The Lord of the Rings films all had fresh ratings of 90% or above. The Hobbit: The Battle of Five Armies opened with $24.4 million. Seems like audiences were indeed ready to journey to Middle-earth one last time. The Battle of Five Armies, the final chapter in director Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy, pulled in an estimated 24.45 million from 3,875 locations yesterday. That's the biggest non-Friday opening of 2014 and the 12th highest midweek debut of all time. The number includes 11.2 million in Tuesday previews, a figure that falls directly between the first two Hobbit films' early screening totals. In 2012, An Unexpected Journey brought in 13 million from midnight only showings, while last year The Desolation of Smaug earned 8.8 million from its initial previews. Of course, both previous films open on a Friday, which makes track comparison a little dicey. At this point, it looks like that The Hobbit 3 will reach 100 million in its first 5 days in domestic theater. Added to the 122 million the film has already earned overseas. We will have complete Hobbit related box office coverage this weekend. The Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies movie review. This is the end. Well, we will come at last to the mountain, to the rattler battle of the five armies, and to end of the road both for Bilbo and his motley band of dwarves, and for the Peter Jackson era of the Middle Earth saga. We have gone there and back again, and this, the sixth film in Jackson's sprawling fantasy series, brings us full circle. As the credit roll on the final entry, I find myself a little sad and a little happy all at once. I have been a critic and a fan of Jackson's work. There has been much to love in both his Lord of the Rings trilogy and in the three Hobbit films, and there has been plenty to gripe about as well. But most of all, Jackson's version of these stories has become the culturally predominant one. Peter Jackson has redefined what we think of when we think about Middle Earth and its characters, and while all six films has been cinematic triumph, they have also taken vast artistic license. With The Hobbit, Jackson has taken a great deal more liberty than he did with the original trilogy. And here's where things get a little mixed up for me, where my enjoyment of the films and my irritation with them collide. Jackson changes are at times brilliant and at times infuriating. Let's start with the good. Jackson paints a beautiful, living fantasy world. It was a peculiar decision to find and the second film period to Smaug laying waste to Lake Town. After all, the film was called The Desolation of Smaug, but the dragon does not really destroy anything. The changes in the opening minutes of Battle of the Five Armies, Smaug is quite a cinematic and special effect achievement. He is massive, and we only truly glimpse the scope of the creature as he sets Lake Town aflame. It's these moments of devastation and beauty that show Jackson at his best. As Bilbo travels back to the Shire, we are treated to scene after scene of his tremendously lovely world. And there's Thorin standing on the frozen waterfall or sweeping shots of the battle itself. The film is constantly eye popping, a sumptuous visual feast backed by an equally gorgeous score. No fantasy film has ever been so immersive in its scope and beauty, and it would bet good money that it will be some time before we see anything quite like it again. This is truly epic fantasy at its best. Then again, the Hobbit novel itself was more of the miniature adventure rather than epic fantasy. Jackson changes all that for better or worse in this adaptation. Jackson tries the story of the Hobbit into the larger War of the Rings. In some senses, I had argued these changes are for the better, if only because change is necessary for a movie going audience. Likewise, Tolkien wrote that the Hobbit long before his ambitions grew into what would eventually become the Lord of the Rings and its accompanying texts, such as the Silmarillion. Jackson takes his little story and then draws form appendix and the first trilogy to not only greatly lengthen the story but to weave it into the larger narrative that is the War of the Rings. So we are shown scene only mentioned in the book are implied later on. Rather than written out wholesale, Gandalf traveled to Dol Guldur in the previous film and is imprisoned there after a Harry Potter style duel with the Neuromancer Akasaron. This time around, Gandalf is rescued by Galadriel and Radagast the Brown and the Galadriel Saruman. And Elrond fight of the ring Wrath and Galadriel banishes Sauron from Mirkwood in a display of rather creepy elf magic. It's all very Jocnian with Ninja Saruman smacking Wrath with his staff and so forth. High action is fun and there's a plenty of it in the Hobbit trilogy, but it's a moment like these where Jackson takes it too far. But I disagree. The fact that we get a real glimpse at Sauron's return does help tie this story to the Lord of the Rings trilogy better. When Thranduil sends Legolas off to find Strider at the end of the film, this also helps provide some origin to their later championship. Jackson makes The Hobbit an epic saga, transforms it into a version of the story that Tolkien might have written had the originally set out to write The Lord of the Rings rather than There Back and Again. Jackson effaces character and makes the tragedy more compelling. Of course, Tolkien was never an action movie author. His books have far less smash-buckling fun than Jackson's film. Jackson loves battle, loves fight scene, and does them very well. Tolkien not so much. But Tolkien was also not particularly vested in crafting deep characters when he wrote The Hobbit either. Thorin is an interesting figure in Tolkien's book, but he is vastly more sympathetic and tragic in Jackson's movies. There is never a Brommer moment in The Hobbit. The book never delved as deep into relationships as we find in Return of the King. Indeed, the Hobbit films are very much about the brittle yet profound friendship between Bilbo and Thorin, and this is the one area where I believe the movies outshine the book. Tolkien's Thorin is hardly sympathetic. He is never as brave or as compelling a leader as the Thorin of the films, thanks largely to a true traffic performance by Richard Armitage. I could sense this from the beginning is an unexpected journey when Thorin really stood out to me as a remarkable character with shades of dark and light. At once heroic and stubborn to the fault, these films may be called The Hobbit, but this is truly the story of Thorin Oakenshield. So, in his final chapter, when the madness and lust for gold takes control of Thorin, we really see that change and are saddened by it much as Bilbo and the dwarves are. When Thorin tries to throw Bilbo over the ramparts to his death, it's much more jarring and brutal. Thorin is a fluid and tragic figure from the beginning, at once proud and bold and pretty. But his madness in Battle of the Five Armies is still striking. His life is cheap, speech is truly terrible. And so, when the shakes of his madness, when he races onto the battlefield, and ultimately when he dies, we are much more emotional invested in his character than we are in the book. Indeed, the deaths of Philly and Killy are more powerful as well, even if the romance between elf archer Toriel and stopping young Killy seems out of proportion. Jackson ultimately takes too many liberties. It this romance that I find most jarring and what it says about Jackson's notion of storytelling, the addition of Legolas at least makes sense. Even if I am not terribly fond of Orlando Bloom, but at least Legolas would have likely been in Mirkwood during these events, quite likely at the battle at the Lonely Mountain. I understand the need to add some female character into the film, as The Hobbit is a decidedly male experience. But Toriel could have been an added character without being part of ham-fisted love triangle. There's something both out-putting about a dwarf on elf romance and a bit repetitive. We already have Aragorn and Arwen, and maybe it's just me, but Avangard Lily and Liv Taylor look just familiar enough to feel like the whole affair simply borrows too much from the previous trilogy, which already emphasized the friendship more than is needed to. At least Turiel is a fighter. I don't really mind many of the other changes, to be honest, even though at times the films are bloated. Having a pair of orc villains rather than merely a faceless orc army makes the orc themselves a little more interesting, fleshing out the Lake Town politics and the role of Bard, the Two Faces Alfred, and so forth all help us sympathize more with the people there and their frustration with the dwarfs. The elf Rod Thranduil actually becomes a pretty interesting, complicated character in the third film, providing a nice contrast to the more slightly laugh-out-good elves like Galadriel and Elrond. Still, the changes also necessitate a certain types of viewing and critical mindset for me. I have to accept that what I am watching is not, in any true sense, Tolkien's book. The Hobbit and the Hobbit are two vastly different creatures. For some, this means there's simply no way to enjoy the film. I disagree. I go into these movies not so much with a suspension of disbelief, but with a purposeful disassociation from the source material, and I find them quite enjoyable. Indeed, even much of the over the top stuff, the bloated fight scenes, and just about everything except the last film's absurd, driven plot to stop Smaug. It helps that the acting is so good. Martin Freeman is the perfect Bilbo. I can only wish that Frodo's casting had been so on the nose in Lord of the Rings. Alas, Elijah Wood is no Martin Freeman, and Frodo will always be somewhat ruined for me. Richard Armitage is fierce and powerful as Thorin. Lee Givan is never given quite enough breathing room, but his bard, the bowman, is solid, and of course, Kate Blanchett's Ian McKellen and pretty much the rest of the cast all turn in wonderful performances. I was even a little sad to see Stephen Ferris Town Master squashed. It also helps that his third film is never particularly boring. The Return of the Kings was incredibly tedious in its final act. Nor does The Hobbit cut any crucial bits, ending on a turn to the Shire in which Bilbo finds all his stuff being auctioned off. Jackson's Lord of the Rings cut the scoring of the Shire, robbing as of a crucial epilogue. I went into Battle of the Five Armies expecting to see a Jackson fight version of the last chapter of Tolkien's work, and that's exactly what I got. Sprawling battle scenes, gorgeous cinematography, and a tragic ending that beautifully tied these stories to The Lord of the Rings, all wrapped up in a 22.5 hour. If you are still watching these films and expecting a faithful tradition of Tolkien's tiny book, well, that's complaint that sparks its expiration date. If you came looking for epic fantasy tragedy and high adventure, well, I was not disappointed. I give the film a buy rating. Go see it in the theater. It's worth it. I didn't see the 3D version, and if I do, I'll report back. The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies. So began a battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of the Five Armies, and it was very terrible. The very terrible battle takes up only one chapter in Tolkien's novel, and it's the majority of the action in Peter Jackson's final entry in the Hobbit trilogy. It's a stunner of a sequence, although it also illuminates the flawed logic of scratching out Tolkien's book into three installments. What is the real story? How do we get from A to B? And Crucially, why do we care? And where is Bilbo Baggins in all of it? The novel is concise, humorous, with a dark periphery, and even in the midst of extremely tense moments, we have Bilbo, a tutting little homebody, wondering how the heck he got involved in all of its nonsense in the first place. There's not enough Bilbo in the Battle of the Five Armies. The story misses his presence. The film's first mildly humorous moment, a line reading from Martin Freeman, comes almost 40 minutes in, and it's refreshing, but it highlights the humbleness of the rest. There are some wonderful sequences in Battle of the Five Armies, and the attention to details is breathtaking. Each different space rendered with thrilling complexity, but the film feels more like a long drawn out closing paragraph rather than like the desolation of Smaug, a vibrant standalone piece of the story. The Battle of the Five Armies picks up where desolation of Smaug left off. Smaug the dragon, voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch, has burst free into the air and descend onto the helpless people of Lake Town. In a blood-curdling fire, Bard becomes the natural leader of the traumatized refugees who straggle around dazed at the destruction of their homes. An endless line of devastated people trail up the dashing slopes toward the lonely mountain, where they hope to achieve compensation for all they have lost. Meanwhile, the dwarf, cutting gently along with Bilbo, hold themselves up in the mountain, protecting the treasure. Most of the dwarfs uneasy about the increasingly paranoid leader of Thorin, played by Richard Armitage. Christopher Lee and Kate Blanchett return briefly for a psychedelic sense of Mortal Kombat with the ring wrath that doesn't seem to have much to do with anything, although it is clearly supposed to be important. And Gandalf returns from imprisonment to the field of battle. Toriel the elf is not given much to do except love a dwarf, a big no-no in her world. She speaks about love repeatedly, softly, and wondrously, and every time she does, the entire film deflates on misses. Romantic love has nothing to do with the story overall, and the love subplot feels so obligatory that it's practically condescending. The real story is about greed, what Tolkien termed dragon sickness, and when Jackson focuses on the aspect. Battle of the Five Armies find its footing. It's a strong theme, Shakespearean in scope, perfectly exemplified in one nightmare sequence in which Thorin, lost to dragon sickness, greedy and jumpy, find himself sucked into a monstrous whirlpool of thick molten gold. Everyone who has read the book knows that Thorin loses it once he has the gold under his care. But Jackson imagined it in a way that is surreal and visceral. When the battle finally comes, it is tremendous. Armies swap towards one another across a vast plain, each group displaying their own intricate maneuvers and battle strategies, wielding their own specific weaponry, making one think it could be a deleted scene from John Woo's Red Cliff, or that a fuzzy Middle Earth equivalent of John Keegan had been a consultant on the film, providing information on how the dwarf infantry worked and how the elves moved in formation. The sequence is an amorphous pantomime of carnage that somehow maintains its sense of spatial relationship and emotional tension. There is a traffic standoff between Thorin and the head orc on a sheet of ice near a treacherous frozen waterfall. Peter Jackson has devoted an amorous part of his life to the creation of these films, and taken all together, they are a major accomplishment. The Hobbit may have been better served by being a single film, by forcing the action to be condensed into a single through line. The storytelling would have more urgency, there would be less room for any fat on the story, there would be no detraction from its overall theme. The world building aspect of the films is thrilling, and there are spaces creatures in all three of the Hobbit films that are unforgettable. But that magic something is missing in battle. There are glimpses of it, glimpses of true poignancy and emotion, the friendship between Thorin and Bilbo, Bilbo turning back to look at the row of dwarves standing in the doorway, the last conversation with Gandalf, and the final moment of the film. These moments are lovely, these moments are presented constantly, strongly, and openly. There is the story. Tolkien's understood the appeal of home, of a nice pipe, and a cozy fire, of being surrounded by these who know you. Where life is safe and your role is set, Bilbo Baggins is thrust out of his comfort zone and must come up with the goods in extraordinary circumstances. Frodo had the same role in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. These journeys are epic and yet they are grounded in those human details that make us understand and sympathize. Hobbits are constantly underestimated, they underestimate themselves. Tolkien's were traps into a great universal anxiety. Would I be up to a similar task? How would I fare if I were called? Would I be brave or would I cave? At its best, Jackson films dig into those questions. The Desolation of Smaug Part 2 in the trilogy, which his reviewer loved and is the strongest of the three films because it never forgets that at the heart of it is a small creature who is overwhelmed by fear and yet who must be brave anyway. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies review, no more than a middling funnel from Middle Earth. And so, in the end, we find ourselves once again at the beginning, having traveled there and back again in the company of elves, dwarfs, dragons, and hobbits. A journey which started 13 years and more than 17 screen hours ago with the unveiling of Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring in December 2001. Back then, the scope and scale of Peter Jackson's visual imagination was breathtaking. Animators like Delph Bakshi has taken a crack at Tolkien's Wheatley tombs before, but Jackson was making game-changing use of computer graphics to blur the line between the real and the imagined. Having never cared for the source novel, I found myself fully transported to Middle-earth, swept away by the sheer cinematic force of Jackson's vision. How long ago that all seems now. Like the Star Wars prequel, the Hobbit movie were always destined to disappoint. Originally slated for direction as a two-parted by Payne's Labyrinth Maestro Guillermo del Toro, the series returned to Jackson's helmsmanship following lengthy production delays and promptly expanded into a trilogy via the addition of extraneous appendix and gender balancing new characters Viz. Evangeline Lily Toriels, yet like the haunted Thorin Oakenshield, a Shakespearean Richard Armitt who spends much of his final movie holed up beneath the lonely mountain. And we open with a spectacular pre-credit set piece in which the enraged dragon Smaug once again voiced by a leisure tongue Benedict Cumberbatch lays siege to Lake Town, raining fire from the heavens. It's a Barapora curtain raiser and air raid horse creature with a dynamic skill which suggested that Jackson's long nurtured dam busted remake will not be short on a British spectacle. As building born an innocent shelter, Lake Town's Grassley master attempt to make off with the load, introducing a note of homage to the Cornic. If only we could save more people, but they are just not worth it. Sailing his soul down the river as Bard the bowman strikes out with his righteous arrows. Sadly, little that fellows can hold a candle to the kinetic opener. While the second Hobbit film, The Desolation of Smaug, largely dispenses with the endless tea party, bottling of opener, an unexpected journey to serve up a succession of fireground thrill rides. Five Armies has more than its fair share of elaborately dressed actors reciting Latin, expository, or emotional dialogue while brooding CGI landscapes roll endlessly in the background. It doesn't help that Jackson shoots every meeting with a panoramic surreal which extracts the virtual artifice. Although once hailed as a potential successor to David Lean, Jackson's cinematic insects are here strongly overshadowed by a computer game aesthetic. Even the more action-packed moments suffer from a superfluity of weightless, Ronnie Chimpy steppy action better suited to Assassin's Creed. Although a scene which one of our many heroes leaps unfazedly atop trembling rocks makes him look like easier than Super Mario. I half expected him to gather spinning gold coins en route. As for the regular final conflict, despite an abundance of goblins, trolls, bats, eagles, and massive drones, Tremor style swarms, it's no better of Helm's Deep. Yet there's a lovely Kurosama moment when the elves leap in formation over the shielded ranks of dwarves, catching their attackers unaware but elsewhere despite the much wanted darkness of the funnel. It's a succession of challenging and banging that continues for what seems like an eternity, only without the sense of history in making. There are, of course, plus points, most notably the irresponsible Martin Freeman, who has made the role of Bilbo Baggins his own. With its flustered perseverance and tirelessly causal expression, Bilbo wrestled the prototypical Tolkien's theme at the heart of his tale. The My Lady of Riches, the corruption of power, which despective levity and engaging brightness. No wonder Maclean's perpetually pipe smoking Gandalf is so keen on the little fellow. You really miss him when he's off screen, which is often as the narrative slips hither and John vigorously addressing its multi-stranded destruction. And what of the future? Since Jackson first set foot in the Middle Earth, we have seen the dawn of performance capture, which originally combined acting with computer graphic, and the widespread rejection of the faster 48 frames per second format in which studios and audience alike seems to have lost both faith and interest. He leaves the Shire in rude health. The future of fantasy cinema changes forever by his work. The legacy of Tolkien's solemnly enshrined in the annals of movie history. Now it really is time to move on. The Hobbit, The Battle of Five Armies Review. Smaug the dragon has risen from his slumber and been unleashed upon an unsuspecting Lake Town, leaving his vast horde up for grabs, drawn by ancient dragons and the promise of gold by the ton, quintet of mighty army descend on the traven city of Erebor to battle it out for wealth, power, and the fate of Middle Earth. So began a battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of Five Armies, and it was very terrible. A spinner of epic tale he may have been, but when it came to the Hobbit climatic engagement, Tolkien was not much of showmanship. The same cannot be said of Peter Jackson, thankfully, who here concluded his six-part Middle-earth saga by transforming a few pages of J.R.R. afterthought into a thunderous meal of interracial warfare. Having navigated the barrel spider riddle and Rons, it's the chance to realize his gigantic five-way battle royal that clearly prompted Jackson's return to Tolkien's world. So much so, in fact, that most other materials falls by the wayside. Smaug is unleashed and dispatched in a fleeting 10 minutes. His brief but spectacular reign of fire cut short by a monologue stopping arrow. Likewise, the rising menace of Sauron is skipped past with sterling alacrity to make way for the main event. Pelennor Fair was a noble struggle between light and darkness, observed from on high amidst the spear of Minas Tirith. This by contrast is a dirty broom crawls every hack, steps and gook filled physically from deep within the sacrum. From the moment elven warriors walked the Deveran Pelnex to illustrate onrushing orcs, the bad taste director reveals in Carnegie with gleeful invention. Troll act as mobile siege engine, ballistates raining death from their shoulders, walls collapsing before bipedal battering rams or rigging, elk mounted Trondoil, these at a resistant desperation, while Deveran fire fontaine spouts exploiting from the back of an armored war pig when Thorin, Richard Armitage, finally leads the charge from the gates of Erebor. The glorious rest of battle met in triumphant euphoria. As both hero and antagonist as various band, this is in large part Armitage's film. Thorin's descent into madness under the dragon's stand is played out with maniacal intensity. His grim rebook of Luke Evans' diplomatic overture, the exchange framed beautifully by a hole in Erebor's barricade, and final hallucinatory epiphany upon a floor of burnished gold are as masterfully shot as they are powerfully delivered. Bilbo, by contrast, is a portrait of quiet underestimate. Freeman has grown into the part like a second skin, his warmth and earnestly underpinning the Hobbit's self-effacing befuddlement. It's not until the end, with the film's most effective piece of foreshadowing, that we see cracks in his character as the ring exerts its influence. At under 2.5 hours, there's a little flab on Five Armies. Jackson has been judicious with the edit, yet disowning anything not essential to the tale at hand. It's a smart work, and the film never drags, but it does not come without cost. What could have been the standout set piece is largely squandered. Eldon and Saruman facing off against the Nazgul in a spectacular but upsetting, short-lived altercation at Gol Galdor. It's a minor disappointment in an otherwise gratifying conclusion, and on that measure we addresses, with the nameless thread left unresolved. Legolas' pursuit of Bolg at Smaug's final is abandoned entirely, and key appearances truncated. Beyond's return lost a single shot. we can look forward to the curtainly of a far weightier extending edition this time next year. A fitting conclusion to Jackson's prequel trilogy and a triumphant epilogue to Middle-earth now complete. The Hobbit stand as a worthy successor to The Lord of the Rings, albeit one that never quite emerges from its shadow. Jackson has crafted a grand old tale to Tolkien's proud and with a single simple bow is final moment on that others a far cleaner send of the return of the king ever did. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies reviews packs a huge chain mile. Peter Jackson has pulled it off. He has successfully concluded his outrageously storytell inflation of Tolkien's Hobbit into a triple-decker Middle-earth saga equivalent to the Rings trilogy and made it something terrifically exciting and spectacular, genial and rushing with all the cheerful spirit of Saturday morning pictures. So, the movie and if poor beamish little Bilbo Baggins now looks a bit lost on his newly elrocked action fantasy canvas, well, he rises his game as well, leavening the mix with some unexpectedly engaging and likable drama. The Battle of the Five Armies is at least as witty as the Return of the King. It packs a huge chain mild punch and has a resounding mythic tongs, but it's less concerted, more accessible, and it makes to do with just the one ending. We are pitched right back into the chaos in which we left the second episode as the dragon Smaug, boomingly voiced by bandaged Cumberbatch. Unleashes his fairy fury on Lake Town, whose buildings are made entirely out of wood, not great if you have got a dragon nearby. Meanwhile, the dwarves has established de facto ownership of the dragon's gold, which they consider their own birthright, and the movie culminates is a gigantic battle of orcs, elves, dwarves, humans, and eagles, all contesting their right to this unimaginable wealth. One thing must accidentally be said about every one of these armies: they are marvelously disciplined, responding instantly enemies to shouted commands, which the farthest shoulder must slowly hear very faintly. But there's one battle that's been lost before a single arrow has been knocked, the Battle of HFR. High frame rate Peter Jackson unveiled the 48 frames per second shooting innovation with huge fuss for his first Hobbit movie. The awful truth, however, is that his innovation just made everything look like the outside broadcast on video for daytime TV. Early screening of his time film and the previous one were in conventional 24 FPS. The reactions were markedly warmer, and although the third movie is officially getting shot in both 24 and 48, it seems that 24 is far more widespread. Normal service has been quietly restored, and the HFR armies are hoping no one noticed them sheepishly sidling off the field of battle. It leaves us to ponder if or how the slower 24 rate itself creates something badly cinematic that lag from frame to frame, which constitute the sublimer, imperceptible visual hum which endows reality with something extra. As for HFR, it may be a lost novelty, the sense sound of the 21st century. As the story reaches its operating conclusion, a number of factors are in play. Gandalf the Grey, played with gusto by Ian McKellen, has been released from his enchantment and now journeys across country to warn Bilbo and the other that battalions of fantastically ugly subtitle orc are marching toward them. The elves has come to the rescue of Lake Town's shivering refugees, horribly let down by their greedy and cowardly master. But the elves' diplomatic relationship with the dwarves, they maintain a certain pointy, inert, volcanic dignity, threatens to break down ever agreed access to the gold and effectively split their anti-orc united front. A romantic drama plays out in tandem with his military scenario. The comely elf Toriel is transgapsly in love with the dwarf Killy, making them the Romeo and Juliet of Middle Earth. But it is Thorin who is the star of the movie. Because of his internal crisis, simply wading waist high in these piles of gold has turned his head, infected him with dragon sickness, and sent him delirious with power and greed. He is basically turning into something like Fred, Sea Dogs, Humphrey, Godard's paranoid prospector in the trier of the Sarah Mador, suspicious of everything and turning on all his friends. It is humble Bilbo who must break the toxic spell. The three Hobbit films has worn down by Tolkien's agnosticism. Although watching them now in sequence might discouragingly mean that the Hobbit prelogue seems of equal power and weight to the supposedly more important Ring saga. The modest subtitle to Tolkien's original book was there and back again. The film has pumped this up to there and there a lot there a multi-movie adaptation of the Silmarillion, with the last one naturally split into two parts. My test my newfound atheism for now Bilbo Baggins' adventure have a winning innocence and buoyancy. The review of the movie The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. The biggest question swirling around Peter Jackson The Hobbit trilogy has been centered around the amount of content. Is there enough of it in J.R.R. Tolkien's book to warrant three Jackson size films? That question has lingered in the back of my mind as I have watched each of the Hobbit movies. The first two movies sometimes struggle to suitable fill their times, yet they manage to keep me engaged. Now we have Peter Jackson's third Hobbit film and final trip to Middle Earth. It's the Battle of the Five Armies, and I can see where people would say it is scratched too thin. But to the question, could The Hobbit have been adapted into two movies instead of three? I think the essential material could have definitely been covered in two installments. But at the same time, the Battle of the Five Armies actually managed its time better than the previous films. Essentially, it's a trilogy big action packed ending. The vast majority of the films is spent building up the cinematic battle and then letting go with an epic sized blowout. I had fun with it and it was far from the snooze fest I feared it would be. The film picks up exactly where the last one left off. There is no time jump, there is no setup. Smaug the dragon is loose and attacks Lake Dawn. Bard guides the displaced people to safety and becomes their de facto leader. Thorin and his band of dwarves has taken back the lonely mountain and its immense deposits of gold and riches. Problem is Thorin has gone made with what is called dragon sickness and refuses to share his newfound wealth with Bard so that the people of Lake Town can rebuild. Then you have Thranduil and his elf army who come to the mountain to claim a white diamond necklace from the treasure. A blinded Thorin refuses and would rather fight than give up the pieces of the mountain riches. With war about to break out between elves, dwarves, and humans, Gandalf arrives bearing news of a massive orc army coming to take the mountain. The question becomes, can they put aside their differences and come together to fight a much bigger and more deadly threat? It's hard to call this film a standard sequel considering the way it's structured. It is much more of a direct continuation, and I simply cannot objectively look as it has a standalone movie. It's impossible to separate it from the previous film, and anyone watching this one without seeing part 2 will undoubtedly has a lesser experience. But as a follower of the series, I think the film does a good job of picking up the story and bringing it to the conclusion. The performances are strong and steady, and the effects are simply incredible. The action fueled final hours featured some great swordplay and a cool host of creatures. But let's face it, the series have several things working against it. It's almost impossible to keep from comparing it to the superior The Lord of the Rings. First, let's take the character. I love Bilbo, Thorin, and Gandalf, but the secondary characters, while good, are not up to those in Lord of the Ring. Then you have the big conclusion itself. This big, sprawling final battle is extremely cool, but it carries almost no connection to the previous two films. In Lord of the Ring, the build up to the big final started in the first film. Everything worked toward that epic point. In this film, the battle does not carry near as much weight, and I was not left feeling quite as satisfied. But is it really fair to compare this film to Lord of the Ring? I don't have a good answer to that. I do think is a stronger film that come give it credit for. It's a tighter and more focused movie and runs 20 minutes shorter than either of the first two Hobbit films. More apparently, it feels in tune with the previous movies and offers us an exciting and fitting conclusion filled with great action and emotion. Could the series has been better as a whole? It probably could, but I find it hard to point a finger at this film as the reason of that. Narratively speaking, this may be the best film of the three. It just had the difficult task of also wrapping everything up. It certainly did that well enough for me. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Army movie review, an epic, mostly satisfying end to a troubled journey. At the service of transparency, I am not a fan of the first two films in Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy. We could go into greater depth, but that would take a good long while I have already detailed my issues elsewhere. I find them tedious and dull and almost completely lacking in all of the things that make me love J.R.R. Tolkien's novel. That said, the latest and final chapter in the franchise, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, is not only the best of the series by a mile, it's damn entertaining and a mostly satisfying end to a troubled, hour-long journey. Battle of the Five Armies is still much more concerned with serving as a prequel to The Lord of the Rings and connecting to a larger mythology than with actually telling Bilbo's story. But as a film, this one thought far from perfect work as well as an actual feat of storytelling. It's also much looser and less tough than the other installments. Like now that they have those films out of the way, Jackson is free to go nuts. You picked up right where she left off last time with the Dragon Smaug, Freeman, Sherlock, Coster, Benedict, Cumberbatch in a marvel of motion captures, taking off to wreak havoc on Lake Town, the dwarves finally reclaiming their rightful home in the lonely mountain, and the wise old wizard Gandalf hanging upside down in a cake, realizing there's some bad times coming of Middle Earth. The opening action sequence, which sees Smaug ripe and burn through the grip standard of the town, is exciting and thrilling, and you don't even care that you don't really see Bilbo for the first 10 or 15 minutes. This is high adventure, the likes of which this series has sorely leaked, and this all goes down before you even see the title card. Once the dragon is dispatched, the remainder of the movie is divided into the setup of the battle of the title and then the actual mile, which is as massive an affair as you expected from a clash of five armies. There are orcs, dwarves, men, elves, Leapex riding a giant moose, Billy Conley riding a fat pig, and tones more than can only comes from Tolkien's. The battle is so big that it begins, is crazy for a while, grows almost tedious and repetitive, and then gets good again. The conflict goes on for so long that it's actually able to evolve over time and gain a second wind. It's reckless in the most epic possible way. Here, Jackson uses a similar strategy to the one he employed in Return of the King. Most of Five Armies is about a single continuous battle, but within the constant fighting, he finds time for smaller, more personal moments. From a character perspective, the narrative is primarily about Thorin Oakenshield, fall, and ultimate path toward redemption. He becomes obsessed with the hoards of gold and treasure in the mountain, turning on his own people, unwilling to honor his word, and basically becomes a total dick. But Bilbo is not willing to write him off. It's easy to overlook the diminutive hobbit in the midst of his swirling chaos. Toriel, Legolas, Bard, and others are out there fighting, being heroic, and giving these big epic speeches, and Bilbo just this little guy. He is unsure of himself and not much use in hand to hand combat, but he is steadfast in his devotion to his friend to the point of making hard choices that will get his ostracized and standing by his victimized, making up for the lack of battle skill by with sheer determination. He is the one thing in this film that is quiet and reserved, while everything else is pure bombast. It's within these moments, woven into the larger battle, where the connection between Thorin and Bilbo comes into play and develop, where the Hobbit shows how vital he is in the big picture, with much more to work with here than elsewhere in the franchise. Freeman delivers a subtle, charming, elegantly moving turn. Jackson may be the least duplicate filmmaker alive. If you are lost, never fear, because every few moments the character on screen tells you exactly what is going on. But in this one arena, anyway, Five Armies delivers real human, you know what I mean, connection and performance that are more than just yelling and scolding. The story, at least in the movies, truly does belongs to Thorin, but in these scenes you realize why it's not totally ludicrous to still call this the Hobbit. While it can be an engaging, accelerating, oft-times surprisingly violent PG-13 movie, Five Army still falls into many of the same trap as the previous films. Most of the dwarfs has always been little more than interchangeable shapes in the background, but here they are relegated a role akin to moving furniture. Half of them don't even have lines and are only present because they are in the book. And to an ad title, there are also way too many plot threads flying around that are never developed in any meaningful way, and that creates a messy tangle. Eventually, it just becomes cluttered you try not to trip over. In short, there are significant problems, but unlike its predecessors, The Hobbit: The Battle of Five Armies has more than enough to distract you and keep you from dwelling on these issues. It may be 144 minutes long, but it's the shortest of the three and particularly flees by in comparison. Don't get me wrong, I still look forward to the day when all three movies are out on video and someone cut the saga down to a single movie that sticks closer to Tolkien's book. But for now, I will take what I can get, and this is not bad. Why The Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies is the worst Peter Jackson's Hobbit movie. Every time Peter Jackson returns to Middle Earth, we expect something special. All of his Lord of the Rings films got Best Picture nominations, and while the Hobbit films have not lived up to the achievement of the first three movies, they have had their moments. In my reviews of An Unexpected Journey and The Desolation of Smaug, I find things to like about each film despite their flaws. So, following the trajectory of the first trilogy, I hope The Hobbit: The Battle of Five Armies would be the best of the bunch. Imagine my disappointment to find out it was the opposite. So, The Hobbit of the Five Armies review. Here are the reasons why The Hobbit: The Battle of Five Armies is the worst Peter Jackson's Hobbit movie. Return of the Kings vs Battle of the Five Armies. When Peter Jackson's last concluded a trilogy, he made one of the best films of all time. The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the Kings is a masterpiece. It's a film I will watch and get emotional about any time it's on. That because not only does it work as a fantastic cap on a great story, it works perfectly as its own story. There's a beginning, a middle, and a few ends. All of the big action and emotional beats are earned within the movies you are watching. The fact you have two movies with these characters beforehand only bluster that fact. A character like Aragorn or Frodo is a different person, not only from the beginning of the trilogy to the end, they are a different person from the beginning of the one movie to the end of that movie. The way the film stands on its own, even more so than the previous two films, is that make it so special. I say all of this because The Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies does none of that. It fails by doing exactly what it's supposed to do, being the third act of a story. The film is 144 minutes of almost non-stop action and no real arc. It has some dazzling excitement, but it fails to resonate because it all lacks emotional weight. It's as if Jackson took what should have been the final 30 minutes of this movie and scratched it by 2 hours. What you have left with is a very beautiful, stable, exciting film that feels completely empty. The first two films are essential components. Make no mistake, if you have not seen the last two Hobbit movies, The Battle of the Five Armies is not for you. The film quite literally picks up as that one ended, with the dragon Smaug attacking Lake Town. There is no paralogue or training files to get you back into the movie. It just starts, and this event, which many consider the climactic moment of the book The Hobbit, ends before the title of the films comes up. Big jaw dropping moments cancel each other out. Once that John Jackson's move all his chase pace to his place on the board and they just go at it. You know those iconic, unforgettable action moments in Return of the King, the Rohan storm Planard fields, Evans kill the Witch King, Aragorn arrives as Gondor with a ghost army. Those are great moments that give goosebumps. Well, the Battle of the Five Armies is basically an 2 hour string of those. Moment after moments of incredible feats of battle that eventually lose their Wow, because they are all stacked up against each other. When we saw Legolas take down and Elephant in Return of the King, it was amazing because we had never seen him do anything quite like that. In this movie, he's got at least 5 moments on par with that feat. Little character development. Those moments would be okay if they help progress the character in any way, they don't. Very little in the Battle of the Five Armies does anything to develop any character from there where they were at the end of the last film. By far the most dynamic in Thorin because at the start of the film he has got dragon sickness, which means he's been travel made by God, much like his grandfather in the prologue of the film. It's not a huge spoiler to say he gets over it, and that change, which is done in a wide, hallucinatory way, is the most broad character grows in the entire film. One on one scores are settled. One of the Jackson decisions that works in the call to reduce the Gynenic 10,000 on 10,000 battle stuff, it's in there, but most of the fighting is much more intimate. He gives almost every single main character their chance to shine, which is nice, but considering they are basically just continually intercut with each other. 80% of the movie take place over one day in one place. None of it really stands up. The end credits are the best part. So the five armies fight and the action is great and our heroes from the previous films have their shining moments. Then once the dust has settled, you are expecting the good stuff. Jackson finally makes a seemingly switch to his Lord of the Ring trilogy. Well, this half works. When Jackson has finished the battle, he creates a pretty solid final few moments. The ending and the credit is particular are the beautiful arc to the rest of his art trilogy. Eventually, it tries right back into the Lord of the Rings just as the first film began. Short Sauron short change. However, the connective tissue we expected in other aspect is not that strong. The origin of Sauron is handled in one very cool but very tangential scene early in the film. It features Kate Blanchett, Hobo waving, and Christopher Lee and kickstones of ass. It also does not fit in with the movie at all. Because the movie mostly all takes place somewhere else, the scenes feels arbitrarily placed as an afterthought. It serves to get Gandalf out of the cake and to wrap up the void side with the necromancer from the first two movies, but it rushes in comparison to everything else. This scene is the perfect example of how, instead of making a bright movie, Jackson has basically taken what should have been the last act of one of his extending edition and release it as one film. Maybe it's not fair to compare The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, to The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. After all, Jackson had a whole book to adopt there, and here he has a precious few pages. Still, the absolute satisfaction and resonances I felt after seeing that movie is not present here, then I felt like I had been a part of something truly special. The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies has a few moments, but mostly it's just a merciful means to an end. Film rating 4 out of 10. How the Hobbit's smoke death was nearly much different and more challenging, explained by VFX artist. VFX artist James Willingham explains how Smaug death in The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies was at one point going to be different and more difficult to create. After being the main threat in The Hobbit, the desolation of Smaug, the menacing dragon is killed shortly into the Battle of the Five Armies, as he needs to be dealt with before the movie focuses on the eponymous conflict that takes up the majority of the story. Smaug is slain by a black arrow fired by Bard the bowman. While speaking with corridor crew, Willingham shares his pitch for Smaug's death in the Battle of the Five Armies, which would have been more complex and drawn out than the version in the completed movie. In the film, after Bard fires the arrow that penetrates Smaug one weak spot, the striking dragon screams onto the surface of Lake Town and crashes through multiple buildings. He takes to the skies once more before he plumps into the waters of Lake Town. The comets of the Willinghams. One of the most challenging sequences I have ever done in the dragon smoke destroying Lake Town when he crashed down into the town. I pitched this idea to the VFX supervisor about the dragon crashing down like a 747, but it was this long shot of concluded idea where I had him coughing up lava blood and crawling around. I just kind of went off the rails and he was like, let's bring that back down a bit and have him crash down. But just kind of get his wing up and fly up and then just die because Peter always wanted him to fall straight down. How Smaug's movie death compares to the movie or to the book. In the book by J.R.R. Tolkien and in the third Hobbit film, Bard kills Smaug by firing his final black arrow into the one spot on Smaug's not covered in protective scales. The novel and the movie take different approaches to how Bard discovered his weakness. The book features a talking thrush who flies toward Boss as Smaug attacks Lake Town. The talking bird informs Bard of Smaug's weak spot in the hollow of his left breast. With the knowledge provided by the thirst, Bard knows how to defeat Smaug and chooses his bow to fire the arrow accordingly. There is no thirst that helps Bard in the movie. As Smaug taunts Bard, he notices the dragon's weakness through his own observation. Before Bard makes his discovery, the movie makes the scene more dramatic and more dire as he realizes that his bow has broken and he has no way to save himself. His son beside him are the town from Smaug. Bard has to craft a makeshift bow and steady the arrow with help from his son in order to successfully fire the arrow. While the Battle of the Five Armies as it falls, the movie successfully makes Smaug death more dramatic and more personal for Bard than in the book. It gave him more agency with the makeshift bow, working with his son and realizing Smaug's weakness without relying on the thirst. Willingham vision could have made the scene more of spectacle, but the final version works and is one of the more memorable scenes from Hobbit trilogy. The ending of The Hobbit explained. It has been 2 years since Bilbo said, I am going on an adventure, as he gleefully pointed out of the Shire, following after Gandalf and quite a merry gathered of dwarves. And here we came to the end of Bilbo's story of Thorns of Thranduil's, but the beginning of the tale of the Lord of the Rings. Like a lot of people, I was skeptical at the money grab of dividing one short children's books into 3 films and having sat through the saga. I still believe 2 would have been enough, but that might have robbed us of some of the magnificent of his third installments. So maybe I should eat my words. The Battle of the Five Armies is, I think, the best of the Hobbit films. It has everything that made the first 2 entertaining: action scene, humor, and memorable character, but adds back in the heart and character development missing from last year's installment. Some of my usual complaints remain intact, namely, I don't think Peter Jackson knows when a film is long enough and his battle scenes and one on one fight reflect this, but all is all. I loved it. Opening with the burning of Lake Town was a nice idea. It sets the stage of immediate action. It exits the major villain of the former film in dramatic fashion, and it paves the way of all the youngest written characters' stories that follow. It sees the rise of Bard as an unlikely leader. It brings the arrival of Thranduil and all the entails, including family strife. And it shows up early signs of Thorin's descent into society. He stands not watching Lake Town burns but staring at the mountain at the great door. Thinking of the treasure contained within, his heart is not with the screaming people of the town, reaping the disaster of his arrogance in challenging Smaug, but with the missing Arkenstone. Thorin's journey has been at the heart of the saga from the beginning, and this is the only film that truly brings that into focus because it pivots on the change in him, in his descent, his redemption, and then finally tragically his death. Truly, for me, the most heartbreaking moment in the film was him laying in Bilbo's arm, taking his last breath as the tearful hobbit assured him that the eagles are here, it's all right. Thorin, the battle is won, but it's too late. He died heroically, but he still died. The veil of sin is still death, Thor like Barrymore, he turns from the darkness at the end. It's a nice reversal. For the other scene, for the first time, it is a hobbit who cradle a king. While so subtle that it might get lost at time in the overwhelming drama of five armies covering upon one place, the plot arc surrounding Trendile also talked on my heartstrings. The hogly disdainful, even dislikable, Elven King's hardened, extracted cracks to show us a glimpse of his true soul, of the immense fear of loss and the hatred of death that impacts many of the decision. His breaks with Legolas is truly what undergoes his pride. You can see it on his face. The intense injury done to him at the thought that Legolas will abandon him because of his behavior. Their reconciliation in the middle of Elrond restraint of things not said but generally understood that bleeds into Thranduil's conversation with Toriel as she holds her fallen dwarf love in her arms and carries for his loss. Why does it hurt so much? She asks the Elven King, and he begs him to take her feelings from her. He refuses and answers because it was real. The line speaks to a profound truth: if there is no pain in loss, the love itself was never genuine. We must feel loss to know love. And in that end, we see Thranduil's true heart. He forgives and understands only when he sees Toriel experiencing an emotional he knows all too well. Loss, the loss of his wife, the immense yawning grief he has lived with ever since. That to me is more tragically romantic than any star-crossed elf dwarf romance on screen. In a handful of lines, in a passionate look, is told a love story even more impacting than what unfolded on screen. But without Toriel and Killy, we would never have seen it. It is these intense but repressed emotional that draw me so to the elves that make me enjoy having them on screen. Even if it brief, the scene with Elrond and Galadriel was short too, but awesome. It ended so abruptly with the juggling thread that I half suspect there is more to come in the extending edition. But it was fun to see Elrond deliver one of the best lines: "You should have stayed dead," and leap in to defend Galadriel, who then turns on the full force of Nana against the darkness, morphs into a great and terrible queen, and banishes Sauron into Mordor. Given her full on god transformation, all I can say is no wonder the dwarfs think her a great elf witch. I love the scene preceding it, but it's not sure how I feel about the interpretation of her. It seems dark, too dark. She looks evil through she is not, and I must wonder why. It is the power of Nana against the Dark Lord that transforms her appearances. Or is it that she is reflecting evil while fighting it off? It's puzzled me. And is the only element I am uncertain of, but I thought the confrontation was done well. I hope there is more of it to come. In terms of cinematic enjoyment, I think this may be my favorite of all six films. I like the characterization and the emotional depth of it. How did you feel about it? Just tell me in the comment section. The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies ending features a 45 minutes battle sequence. Billy Boyd wrote and performed and created songs. With a title like The Hobbit of the Five Armies, there are pretty high expectations for a rather epic looking battle sequence. Indeed, Peter Jackson has revealed that the film concluded with a 45-minute fight during the climax as the various armies of Middle-earth all descend upon the lonely mountain now that the dwarf Trier of Erebor is no longer being guarded by that fearsome dragon Smaug. Jackson is currently putting the finishing touch on the film during post production in anticipation of its December 17th release. But he recently talked a bit about planning the battle sequence with EW and also unveiled some rather massive looking concept art. Additionally, Warner Bros. Has announced that Lord of the Rings actor Billy Bart will perform the closing credit song The Last Goodbye, which he co-wrote with the filmmakers. Hit the jump for more on The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies climatic action sequence as well as the end credit song, including Jackson's thought on how these eagles would have made the Lord of the Rings much more shorter. Speaking the EW about the titular climatic battle sequence, Jackson says he and his team have installed a rule that hopefully keeps the emotional focus on the main characters. We have a rule that we are not allowed to go more than two or three shots of enemy's people fighting without cutting back to our principal characters. Otherwise, the audience just ends up with battle fatigue. It planning out the battle sequence that take place in confined space, Jackson and his team had to logistically plot out exactly how things would go down. Before we could lose the first arrow, we had to design the landscape itself and figure out okay, if we have 1000 orc, how much room are they going to take up? Are they going to fill up the valley or look like a speck? Then we could start running the arrow on the schematics. They went so far as to draw out a color coded map that shows the position of all of the different types of armies that covers at the bottom of the lonely mountain. Jackson also discussed the fact that the Eagles pop back up in the Battle of the Five Armies, addressing one of the main sarcasm of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Tolkien uses eagle in a way that can be kind of awkward because they tend to show up out of the blue and change things pretty quickly. So here they are just part of the plan, not the saviors. I mean, I do realize that if the eagles had just been able to bring Frodo to the Mount Doom in Lord of the Ring and let him drop the ring in, these movies would have been much shorter. In the Hobbit trilogy news, Warner Bros. Has announced that Lord of the Ring actor and songwriter Billy Boyd has been tapped to co-write and perform the end credit song for the Battle of the Five Armies. In the official statement, Boyd had this to say about the last goodbye. I wanted the song to be a goodbye to all the fans who have been part of this amazing journey and to the whole world of Tolkien's, and it has been told in the cinema for our generation, says Bard in the release. No one knows the world of Tolkien's better than Peter, Fran, and Philippa, and I feel incredibly touched and honored to be asked to write and perform these songs. And to be at the start and end of these beautiful historic stories, to once again work so closely with them has been one of the true honor of my working life. Boyd performed the Steward of Gondor in the Return of the King to Chill, including results, and the song was used heavily in the first trailer for the Battle of the Five Armies. Neil Finn wrote the performed song of the Lonely Mountain for Unexpected Journey, while E.D. Shireen wrote and performed as Fire, The Desolation of Smaug, The Hobbit, The Battle of Five Armies is running in theaters. Who are the five armies? It's surprisingly complicated. The finale of Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy, The Battle of the Five Armies, wraps up Bilbo Baggins' epic journey across Middle Earth and sets the stage for The Lord of the Rings. But who extremely are the five armies? Between author J.R.R. Tolkien's novel and Jackson's film, the answer is not simply Tolkien specific the five sources in his writing. So began a battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of Five Armies, and it was very terrible. Upon one side were the goblins and the wild dwarves, and upon the other elves and men are dwarves. The elves were the Selvan elves of Mirkwood, and the men were from the nearby lake town. The dwarves were a combination of Thorin and his company, and the torrents of the Aran Hills. Note, however, that when Tolkien wrote goblins in The Hobbit, he is actually referring to orc, which only adds to the confusion. Updated on May 17, 2024 by Robert Fox, the article has been expanded to include new information on the battle itself and the specific of the force involved. In addition, the animated version of The Hobbit is included in the discussion. Finally, the article's formatting has been updated to match FBR's current standard. What was the Battle of the Five Armies? The Battle of Five Armies takes place after the original novel The Hobbit, following the death of the dragon Smaug at the hands of Bard the Bowman. Thorin Akalshir's company of dwarves is left in control of the Lonely Mountain and Smaug's colossal mountain of treasure. Bard leads the men of Lake Town to entrance, seeking the presumably unguarded gold to rebuild their community destroyed by the dragon's attack. They are joined by the forces of Elf King Thorondale, who have come to aid Lake Town and feel entitled to a share of the gold. Thorin refuses their entreaties based in part of the Elf King treatment of his company when they pass through Mirkwood, resulting in a brief, non-violent siege of the mountain. Bilbo Baggins hopes to break the settlement by slipping out of the mountain and bringing Bard the Arcan Shield, the greatest gem in the treasure hoard. Hoping it would leverage Thorin into seeing reason. Instead, Thorin summons his cousin Dan Ironfoot, who arrives with a host of dwarfs. For one terrible moment, it looks like a fight between the three forces will break out, with men and elves on one side and dwarfs on the other. Before that happens, another army consisted of goblins from the Misty Mountains and trained dwarves, wargs, and baits arrives, leading by the warlord Bolg. They hope to claim Smaug's treasure for themselves, smashing the forces gathered and claiming dominion over the entire region. The trio of forces at the Lonely Mountain agree to put aside their differences and fight the common foe. The battle proceeds. Hard fought and bloody, but the goblins ultimately look to prevail. At that moment, in classic Tolkien's fashion, the giant eagles arrive and turn the tide. When they see the goblins, they fly right at them out of hatred of the creatures, even though they were saving the elves, men, and dwarves. The eagles simply cared about destroying the goblins. They help break the enemy's lines and send their forces packing. Thorin is killed in the fighting, and Dane grants Bard his share of the treasure, allowing him to rebuild Lake Town and ceding a portion to the Elf King and recompense. Bilbo takes only two small chests, one filled with gold, the other with silver, and returns to the Shire in victory, along with his funny magic ring that leads directly to the events of the Lord of the Rings. Who were the five armies in the Hobbit? Men, their leader was Bard the Bowman from Lake Town. Elves, the leader was Thranduil from Mirkwood. Dwarfs, Thorin Oakenshield and Dine Ironfoot. The Lonely Mountain, the Iron Hill. Goblins, Orc, or Mount Gundabad. Their leader were Azog and Bolg from the Misty Mountain. Orc, the Gel Guldor. Their leader were Azog and Bolg from Mirkwood. Wolves, the Misty Mountain. Eagles from the Misty Mountain. The most honest answer is that the five armies are the men, elves, orc, dwarfs, and the eagles. However, the former answer depends on which source you consult. Tolkien's Jackson R. Animators Arthur Rankin and Jules Bass, who directed the 1977 version of the story. Even they cannot seem to get the component straight. The confusion begins with Tolkien's, even though the director spill it out in the context, and yet two insectable factors muddy those waiters considerably. Firstly, separate the dwarves and goblins despite being a single army. Gandalf says as much three short paragraphs earlier than he states that the goblin rides upon dwarves and walks are in their train. Secondly, it completely overlooked the eagle, who are most absurdly a separate force and probably should place the dwarves in the counting. Tolkien's most likely refrained from citing them because they had not yet arrived at the point in the text, and mentioning they would spell the surprise of the leader. Substituting verbs in the count makes an easy shorthand solution despite the confusion that arrives from it. It especially difficult considering the battle important in Middle-earth history. Gandalf is preparing for Sauron to make his move, and the Lonely Mountain constitutes a major defensive point in that section of the world. Victory in the Battle of Five Armies keeps the mountain under dwarfship control, fostering improved relationship with Lake Town and the Mirkwood elves. Otherwise, the Orc would claim it and create a threat to all of the neighboring communities. Tolkien's outlined the full impact in his appendix to The Lord of the Rings, as the Lonely Mountain becomes a bulwark for Sauron's views and stem the attacks of his armies, while Frodo and his friends destroy the ring. In light of that, the confusion surrounding exactly which army is which takes on added importance. Jackson changes to the five armies don't clarify things. Jackson does not include the Eagles in the list of forces in the Battle of the Five Armies either. In the documentary Beneath the Thunder, Forging a Battle of Five Armies, part of the extending edition of Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, the forces are listed as men, elves, dwarfs, the orc of Dor Guldur, Sauron's keep in Mirkwood, and the Orcs of Mount Gunnabad in the Misty Mountain. So not only does he not include the eagles, but he also replaces Tolkien's white wolves with separate groups of orc that allows him to more formally incorporate the subplot entailing Gandalf's execution to Gil-Galad, which Tolkien's only briefly mentioned but which the movie trilogy developed at length. Remember that other key figures are involved in the Battle of Five Armies, including Gandalf, Bilbo, and beyond the Skin Charger, although none count as an army. More confusion arises because Goblin and Orc are depicted as separate races in Jackson's Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films. Tolkien uses the term Goblin and Orc interchangeably as they are relatively similar in his lore. All of them ultimately serve Sauron. That's why Thorin's elvish sword is called Ostred's Goblin Cleaver, but the Goblin's called is simply Biter. Even in the names of weapons, the term for orc is not consistent, which may cause misunderstandings when figuring out who was involved in the Battle of the Five Armies. Jackson divided them into rough, suspicious to visually distinguish them on screen. Sauron orc from Mordor are typically smaller and greener than Sauron's Uruk-hai from Isengard, who can move in daylight unimpeded. At the same time, goblins live underground in the Misty Mountain. The Fellowship encounters them in the mines of Moria. The Uruk-hai had not yet been created during the events of the Hobbit movies, leaving Jackson's two orcish armies very loosely divided between the Misty Mountain goblins and Mordor orc from Sauron's stronghold in Dol Guldur. Jackson's version helped develop the orc. One of the reasons director Peter Jackson chose those changes is to further emphasize the orc as a major villain in the Hobbit trilogy. It's not a secret that the three films desperately needed content to pair their running length. And after effect of trying to expand the novel well past that it can support, which meant creating a few foes to badwill the heroes. Smaug is killed early in the Battle of Five Armies, leaving a gap in viable antagonists for most of the film. Jackson filmed that gap with Azog and his son Bolg, who are briefly mentioned in Tolkien's text but receives much more developed treatment in the movies. That comes complete with an old grudge against Thorin Oakenshield and a strategic mind necessary to give his opponent on the battlefield more than they could handle. In light of that, Jackson's specific choice regarding the five armies make much more sense. It makes the two orcs more prominent and gives their forces more distinctive than Tolkien's brief description. It also allows him to distinguish the arrival of the eagles the way Tolkien did, considering how often the author liked to use them, and that Jackson himself has already filmed them coming to the rescue multiple times in earlier Lord of the Rings adaptation. He can be forgiven for wanting to downplay it in the favor of the orcs. The animated Hobbit is clearest about the Battle of the Five Armies. One adaptation keeps things crystal clear. The 1977 animated version of The Hobbit, directed by Rankin and Bass, depicts an extremely brief version of the Battle of Five Armies. Most of the conflict is left on screen. The film is intended for families, and the director excised most of the violence. Bilbo counted the number of armies in the fight on his fingers: men, dwarves, elves, goblin from the misty mountains, and eagles. Despite that, it's the most accurate of the three versions in terms of who is actually doing the fighting, and definitely the easiest for reader or viewer to understand. In all three cases, the confusion arises out of necessity. Tolkien's likely hope to preserve the surprise of the eagle's arrival, while Jackson faces with development content for three movies instead of one. uses to connect an outlying subplot to the main story. Rankin Boss resources to expediency. The movie runs a slender 78-minute and basically cut to the chase to save time. For the other two, clarifying the battle participants would have ruined or complicated another part of the story. Their choices are all unstable and likely resulted in strong overall narratives. But to this day, their decisions still make reader and viewers scratch their head. All three films in the Hobbit trilogy and the 1977 animated feature are currently streaming on Max. The Hobbit, everything what happened to the dwarves after the Battle of the Five Armies. Given that the heroes of the prequel tale are nowhere to be seen in the Lord of the Rings movies, there are many questions about what happened to the dwarves after the Hobbit movies. The Hobbit trilogy follows Thorin Oakenshield and his band of dwarves as they head out on a quest to Lonely Mountain in order to defeat the deadly dragon Smaug and reclaim the wealth of their people. Their epic journey culminates in the death of Smaug and the Battle of Five Armies, but there is still a lot not revealed in the movies about what happened next. Of course, these features are covered in depth in the books. Thought there is a journal consensus that the Hobbit movies fell short of the Lord of the Ring movies. There is still a lot of fun to be had in returning to Middle Earth and following this new band of heroes on an adventure. Given the size of Thorin's company, it is a little harder to form a connection with all of the dwarfs. However, they are still endearing character, and it is interesting to see what became of them, with some living happy lives after the battle and others only meeting more tragedy. The death of Thorin, Oakenshield, and his nephews. Thorin was made to be a very complex character in the Hobbit movies, and his final death reflected that. Thorin was made to be a very complex character in the Hobbit movies, and his final death reflected that. When Smaug is killed by Bard the Bowman of Dale, Thorin ranges on his promise to Lake Town and tries to hoard all of the Lonely Mountain's wealth. Addicted to his newfound treasure, the discards the wise swords of Gandalf and calls his comrades to arms in order to defend their inheritance. He is then drawn into battle against a group of unexpected armies and is seriously injured during the fight, dying shortly after the battle is won. His nephews, Philly and Killy, made the same fate as they tried to protect him from the subsequent onrush. Aside from Sceneborn's Barrymore dying in the Fellowship of the Ring, Peter Jackson avoided killing the main character in his first trilogy. However, he keeps it tragic, and with the death of the three prominent dwarfs making for a bittersweet final. Dane Ironfoot became king under the mountain. Dane is the cousin of Thorin who responds to the call for help. When Dane arrives at the Lonely Mountain, he brings with him an army of 500 soldiers, each of them armed to the teeth and terrifyingly strong. When Thorin dies, however, Dane celebrates all those who were crucial in destroying the enemy, including presenting Lake Town with Bilbo's share of the reward. He is later crowned king under the mountain, a prestigious honor only given to the rulers of Erebor. By extension, he becomes the head of all dwarves, claim that are descends from the line of Thorin the Deathless, the first dwarfs ever born. Dane became the fifth dwarf to hold the title of king under the mountain and the first to take the title who comes from outside of the main bloodline. Owen's grisly fate. Many of the dwarves do not live to see Frodo cover the world of evil, but Owen's death is really quite sad. While it does not reveal how he died in the Lord of the Ring movies, the Fellowship of the Ring does foreshadow the moment. In the Lord of the Rings, a tentacle beast known only as the Watcher in the water attack Frodo right before the Fellowship enters Moria. but he is thankfully rescued due to the other's quick response. Sadly, Owen is not as lucky when he encounters the beast. He and other dogs attempt to flee from the Moria orc who had taken over their original homeland. However, when they come out of the gate, the water is right up against the shore, and Owen is taken by the creature and pulled into the water. It is one of the more mysterious Lord of the Rings creature, but proves to be a deadly beast in the end. Balin, Lord of Moria. Balin was seen as one of the wisest and most patient dwarf who was never as brash or headstrong as some of the others. This made his key advisor to Thorin's throughout their quest. After the Battle of the Five Armies, Balin takes a group of patriotic dwarves in order to re-establish their authority over Moria. While he is technically a contender to the throne, his colony was not large enough for him to be referred to as the king. Nevertheless, his governance comes to an abrupt and a few decades after consents fighting in the darkest reaches of Moria. Balin is finally killed by the orcs now swarming there. The Fellowship observes the storm as they take the Moria shortcut, where they also find out exactly what transpired by reading the Book of Measurable. Uri and the Book of Measurable. The depths of Moria are no less terrifying than the vast expanse of Mordor, which makes for a rather lonely place to spend the final days of one's life. Ori is one of those unfortunate characters and the last of Thorin's company to die before the War of the Ring. Sadly, he had lived a peaceful life for some time after the Battle of the Five Armies, enjoying the wealth of their success before accompanying Balin to his new colony. Oren is one of the dwarfs who takes the time to bury Balin in his stone tomb before he and the remaining dwarfs make their last stand. Oren is one of the dwarfs who takes the time to bury Balin in his tomb before he and the remaining dwarfs make their last stand. As a scroll keeper, he is one of the writers who give the final account of their fight as read by the Fellowship of the Ring in the Book of Measurable. In fact, Oris corpse is shown to be holding on to the book before Gandalf takes it away. Dolin lives a long life in Erebor. Dolin was one of the toughest and most five-stars, even of his appearances in the Hobbit movies differs from the books. It is perhaps not surprising that he then managed to survive the Battle of Five Armies. However, after their victory, he chooses to remain behind in the Lonely Mountain rather than go to Moria with the other, including his brother Balin. He continues to live in Erebor for the remainder of his life, which goes on for a shockingly long time given his peers' average life expectancy. Dwarves are said to live for about 250 years, being the children of Ola the Vala, but Dolan dies when he is 340 years old. This makes him one of the oldest dwarfs to ever lived in Middle Earth. Given Dolan's warrior persona, it is interesting that he is one of the few who is not killed in battle. Glenn at the Council of Elrond. Glenn is the father of Gimli, one of the crucial members of the Fellowship and the only one of Thorin's group to have met with Frodo. This event takes place at the Council of Elrond at Rivendell, during which the final selection is made for the 8 individuals who are to accompany Frodo on his journey to Mordor. Thus, presence is not pointed out in the Lord of the Ring movies. He is a valuable part of the council. He tells the period of the wondering about everything that had happened in Erebor after the Battle of Five Armies, including of its cousin Balin's steadfast decision to restore Moria back to the hands of the dwarves. It would have been interesting to see this character make the connection between the Hobbit movies and the Lord of the Ring movies.
Das is the only known dwarf woman in this story. The death of Philly and Killy are a painful blow to all dogs, especially because of the honorable manner in which they sacrificed their life to save their dying leader. As a tribute to their courage, their mother, Dis, who also happened to be Thorin's sister, is the only female dwarf to receive a mention in the story. Dwarves women have been further explored outside of the books, including with the character of Disa in the Rings of Power cast, which could be a nod to this given their similar names. Interestingly, however, dwarf women are said to be particularly indistinguished from their male counterparts, having a flowing beard and garbage in very similar clothing. Her brief mention helps to establish the larger community of the dwarfs, which was subsequently expanded on in other elements of the franchise. Bamber's life of Lair. Bamber is not really interested in the quest, choosing instead to eat, drink, and sleep whenever he gets the chance. He is indeed a brave warrior. He becomes a dangerous combatant if really pushed, but his relaxed demeanor often gets him in trouble. For instance, he gets himself enhanced with a sleep charm, forcing his contemporaries to drag his unconscious body along. Nevertheless, it looks like Bomber had a rather sedentary life after everything settled down. As Frodo finds out that he had put on so much weight that it required the assistance of multiple people to carry him from one place to other. It is the comical, although not unproblematic, way of bringing the character to a close in the story, given that he was largely in a comedic relief character in the movies and having him die in battle would be hard to take. Beaver, Boofer, Dory, Nuri live happily ever after. Even with all the extensive writing of the timeline of The Lord of the Rings and the astounding history of Middle Earth, there are not conclusive facts about what happened to some of the members of Thorin's band of dwarfs. Four of the dwarfs are compared to still be alive during the War of the One Ring, or at least in its initial stage. Beaver and Boofer are probably clustered away in the lonely mountain, preferring to spend time with their riches than go on another adventure. On the other hand, Duri and Nuri may have gotten involved in the Battle of Dale, a major war between the Ereborian dwarf and the Australians alien with Sauron. But there are no details regarding when or if they died. With the franchise always expanding, there is still hope for these questions to be answered.